Airport security kicked a black CEO's teen son down the stairs, but moments later, the furious father struck back so violently, the attacker's skull split open. He kicked a boy down the stairs, laughing as if a father's pain meant nothing. Subscribe if you believe no badge is above the law. The security doors hissed open just as Jeremiah Quinn stepped through them, the gleam of the terminal floor mirroring his polished shoes. His gait was steady, the rhythm of a man who had carried himself through boardrooms and battlefields of corporate warfare. Beside him walked his son, Malik, hoodie bright yellow against the grayscale of travel suits and blazers. In Malik's arm, a worn sketchpad bulged with pages, shuttle schematics, orbital arrays, a child's dreams detailed with the precision of someone raised by an aerospace pioneer. But they didn't make it 20 feet into Stonewick International Airport before something felt wrong. The stairs weren't curious. They were calculating. Uniformed agents clustered near a checkpoint turned abruptly as the two passed, and one man, tall, pale, with a taut jawline and clipped blonde hair, tracked them with eyes that didn't blink. The flight crew near the gate whispered behind gloved hands. One of them, a sharp-nosed man with hollow cheeks and a pressed uniform, made no attempt to look away when Jeremiah met his gaze. Rigg Voss. Jeremiah recognized the name from earlier briefings, a senior flight attendant with disciplinary complaints buried under HR jargon. The man didn't look away. His stare had weight. Jeremiah placed a calm hand on Malik's shoulder. "Stay close," he murmured. They reached the boarding zone where uniformed staff scanned boarding passes with rehearsed smiles, except the smile vanished when it was Jeremiah's turn. The agent glanced at the screen, then stepped aside as another figure pushed forward. Security Officer Mason Truke. Broad-shouldered, buzz-cut, and already frowning like a man ready to start a problem. "Random screening," Truke barked, voice echoing off steel beams. Jeremiah raised an eyebrow. "We've already cleared the first checkpoint." "Boarding pass. ID. Don't care," Truke growled, pointing at Malik. "Both of you." "Step aside." Jeremiah glanced toward the gate, then back to Malik. The boy said nothing, but his fingers gripped the sketchpad tighter. Jeremiah let out a slow breath. "Follow his instructions," he said calmly. They moved to the side area near the boarding platform. Truke stood in their path, arms crossed. No scanners, no equipment, just a hallway with an open stair ramp down to the tarmac. Malik looked confused. Truke turned and, without a word, shoved Malik backward. It happened fast, so fast Jeremiah's brain didn't register it until the thump of Malik's body bouncing against the metal railing cracked through the air. "Malik!" Jeremiah shouted, lunging forward. The boy had tumbled down 3 hard steps, landing on one side with his sketchpad flung midair, pages fluttering like wings caught in a storm. He groaned, curling slightly, one hand to his ribs. Truke stood at the top of the platform, unbothered. Passengers nearby gasped. A man near the coffee kiosk fumbled his phone into recording position. A woman clutched her child closer. Jeremiah dropped to one knee beside Malik, checking for blood, fracture, signs of trauma. His pulse thundered in his ears, but his voice stayed even. "Breathe, son." In through the nose, out through the mouth. I'm okay," Malik whispered, though his face twisted in pain. And then Voss arrived, smiling. He approached with theatrical calm, stepping around the still-stunned passengers. "Accidents happen," he said softly, just loud enough for Jeremiah to hear. "Airports can be such dangerous places for fragile ambition." Jeremiah's eyes narrowed. "You planned this." Voss didn't respond directly. He leaned closer to Truke and muttered something that Jeremiah couldn't hear. Truke nodded once, turned, and walked off without a word. Malik struggled to sit up. "Dad." Jeremiah supported him and guided him to a nearby bench. A security guard finally arrived, but not for Truke, not for answers, just with vague gestures and a clipboard. "Sir, if you'd like to file an incident report." Jeremiah stared at him in disbelief. "Incident?" "I understand your frustration," the man said without conviction. "It appears your son may have lost his balance." Jeremiah's voice dropped to a low growl. "He was pushed." "I can take your statement if you—" Jeremiah stood slowly, towering over the man. "You'll get more than a statement. You'll get subpoenas. But for now," he turned to Malik, who clutched his ribs and nodded bravely. "We're boarding that flight." The guard hesitated. "Sir, are you sure you—" "I'm not missing this summit," Jeremiah said, walking past him, his voice hard. "And I'm not teaching my son that silence is safer than standing tall." They boarded without further interference, but every step down the jet bridge felt heavier. The overhead lights flickered for a second as if something was off kilter or watching. Jeremiah helped Malik settle into his seat and retrieved the sketchpad, now bent and stained on one corner. He looked around the cabin. Something wasn't right. Every polite smile felt like a performance. Every idle crew member gaze felt like calculation. And somewhere behind that curtain near first class, Jeremiah knew Voss was waiting. "Your success makes some people nervous," Jeremiah once told Malik, the memory hitting him like a whisper from the past. "But don't let them rewrite who you are." Malik's scream tore through the boarding platform as his body pitched backward, his sneakers losing grip against the cold steel steps. The sound of scraping fabric and rattling metal echoed like a hammer striking nerves, his yellow hoodie catching briefly on the railing before tearing free. His sketchpad, once clutched so tightly, flew into the air, pages fanning out like broken wings before scattering down the stairs. Jeremiah's heart clenched. In an instant, the world slowed. He lunged forward, his polished shoes pounding against the grated steps, arms outstretched. He caught Malik halfway down, pulling him against his chest, feeling the boy's ribs tremble with sharp pain. Passengers gasped above, their chatter breaking into a storm of shouts and hurried whispers. A few pulled out phones, their camera lenses rising like judgmental eyes. Jeremiah's gaze shot upward to the man who had caused it, Mason Truke, the broad-shouldered security officer still looming at the top of the stairs. His face was carved with indifference, lips pressed into a flat line, as though shoving a boy had been no more consequential than brushing dust from his sleeve. "Stay down, son," Jeremiah whispered, his voice a taut string pulled to its breaking point. Malik clutched his side, wincing, his breath ragged. His eyes were wide, brimming with both pain and confusion. Jeremiah rose slowly, one arm steadying Malik, the other tightening into a fist at his side. "You shoved a child," he said, each word measured but laced with heat. His voice carried across the hushed platform, bouncing off the steel walls. Truke didn't flinch. He merely shifted his stance, squaring his shoulders. "Random screening," Truke barked, his tone flat, devoid of apology. He didn't even glance at the boarding passes still clenched in Jeremiah's other hand. Jeremiah's jaw tightened. That wasn't screening. That was assault. Before the silence could thicken further, another figure emerged from behind the officer, Rigg Voss, the flight attendant. His uniform was crisp, his tie knotted perfectly, but his expression was unsettling. He smiled faintly, a thin, curling smirk that didn't belong in a place of service. His eyes found Jeremiah and Malik like a predator sighting prey. Voss leaned close to Truke, whispering words too low for others to hear, but the intent was clear in the way Truke's jaw twitched before he gave a single, sharp nod. Without another word, the officer turned and strode away, vanishing into the crowd beyond the gates, leaving Jeremiah and his injured son behind. The smirk on Voss's face deepened as he watched Jeremiah kneel beside Malik on the nearest bench. Jeremiah's hand shook as he brushed dirt and blood from his son's scraped arm, but his voice remained steady. "Breathe slowly, Malik. I've got you." His eyes flicked upward just once, locking with Voss's, searching for explanation but finding only mockery. Voss didn't speak, yet the silence between them was louder than any accusation. He turned deliberately, his polished shoes tapping against the floor, and disappeared down the jet bridge. The faint scent of jet fuel drifted in from the tarmac, mingling with the metallic tang of Malik's blood. Passengers lingered nearby, uncertain. Some offered Jeremiah sympathetic glances but did not step closer. Others filmed openly, their screens capturing his quiet fury, Malik's pain, and the chilling absence of justice in the moment. The air felt heavier now, charged with something unspoken, something orchestrated. Jeremiah sat rigid, his arm around Malik's shoulders. His pulse thundered in his ears, but his mind sharpened with clarity. The officer's shove had not been clumsy. The attendant's smirk had not been casual. This had been deliberate, and the pieces began to fall into place. His thoughts darkened. They had tried to break his composure in front of his son, to turn strength into helplessness. But they had miscalculated. He bent close to Malik's ear, voice low and unshakable. "This isn't about screening," he muttered. "This is about silencing." Jeremiah refused to be separated from his son. The request had been made with a smile that felt too rehearsed, too sharp at the edges, and the way the crew member lingered in expectation only confirmed the unease simmering beneath the surface. "We'll keep our seats together," he said firmly, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made the attendant nod stiffly and retreat down the aisle. The tension in the cabin thickened immediately, like smoke curling unseen through narrow spaces. Passengers averted their gazes, suddenly fascinated by magazines, phones, or the backs of seats. Jeremiah sat straighter, his jaw tight, while Malik leaned close, his hands clutching the sketchpad that had survived the earlier assault on the stairs. The hum of the engines deepened as the aircraft taxied across the runway. Outside the oval window, the late afternoon light shimmered across the tarmac in streaks of gold, but the warmth of that view did little to ease the chill that seemed to hang over row 1. Jeremiah's mind ticked through the sequence of events: Truke's shove, the false apologies, the deliberate attempt to split father from son, and all of it led back to one man. His suspicion became certainty when Rigg Voss appeared again, striding down the aisle in crisp uniform, his badge glinting under the cabin lights. His face carried no hint of remorse. If anything, his grin widened at the sight of Jeremiah and Malik seated together, a predator circling prey that refused to scatter. Voss bent low, his voice meant only for Jeremiah, though his words slithered into Malik's ears too. "Some fathers learn too late. Some sons fall harder the second time." The cadence of the whisper was cruel, designed to provoke, and his eyes lingered on Malik's trembling hands as if savoring the boy's fear. Jeremiah did not rise, did not lash out, though every muscle in his body coiled with the instinct to do so. He met Voss's stare with quiet fire, unblinking, unshaken, but beneath the stillness his thoughts raced. Each second of silence was a choice, a father refusing to give his enemy the reaction he craved. Malik pressed closer, whispering hoarsely, "Dad, what does he mean?" His voice cracked, the edges of panic barely concealed. Jeremiah reached across, placing a steadying hand on his son's shoulder, his fingers firm, grounding. "It means he's trying to scare us," he said softly, though his gaze never left Voss. "But fear only has power if we give it." Voss smirked as if amused, straightened, and walked away with the measured arrogance of someone who believed the battle already won. Jeremiah followed his retreat with sharp eyes until the man disappeared into the galley, the threat still echoing in the stale recycled air. The seatbelt sign dinged overhead, the signal of departure, but Jeremiah's mind was already far from routine announcements and safety demonstrations. He slid his phone discreetly from his pocket and typed with deliberate speed. To his security team, "Stay alert. Something's off." His thumb lingered over the screen before pressing send. He imagined Dominic and Kyle, his marshals, seated at their posts outside the aircraft, eyes scanning the movements around the plane with military precision. He pictured them trading a brief nod when the message appeared on their encrypted channel. The thought gave him no comfort, only resolve. He leaned toward Malik, lowering his voice. "Listen to me carefully. Whatever happens, you stay close to me. Don't panic. Do you understand?" Malik nodded quickly, his wide eyes reflecting trust laced with dread. Jeremiah gave a faint squeeze of reassurance, but the knot in his chest remained. He knew this was more than intimidation. It had been too precise, too staged. There was a design at play, one that involved calculated risks and cold intentions. The irony was bitter. He had built engines that defied gravity, yet here, in this cabin, he was being dragged into a fight to prove his own humanity. Outside the window, the ground shrank as the plane lifted into the sky. Jeremiah caught sight of two figures standing near the terminal gates, his marshals. Their stance was deceptively casual, hands folded, eyes sharp, but Jeremiah recognized the readiness beneath their posture. A silent reminder that he was not alone, no matter how carefully this trap had been arranged. He exhaled slowly, a breath that carried both anger and discipline, and whispered so only Malik could hear. "They think we're alone," he said quietly. "They're wrong." The lights dimmed without warning, casting the airplane cabin into a sudden hush. The white noise of the engines remained, but every conversation, every rustle of movement ceased. Something shifted, an invisible tension that moved like static through the rows of passengers. Then, from the galley's shadowed entrance, Rigg Voss emerged. In his hand gleamed a silver blade, wicked and cold, catching the low ceiling lights in flashes. But it wasn't the knife alone that froze hearts. It was what he held in the other hand, Malik. The teenager's yellow hoodie was wrinkled and gripped tightly at the collar as Rigg dragged him forward, the blade pressed hard against his neck. Malik's wide, terrified eyes searched the aisle. His lips trembled, but he made no sound. "You want to reach so high?" Rigg spat, his voice low and venomous, yet sharp enough to cut through the air. "Let's see how far you fall when it's your blood on the floor." A collective gasp rose from the cabin. Passengers ducked or instinctively shielded their children. Some cried out, others reached for their phones but froze midway, unsure if movement would make them targets too. Jeremiah stood. His first instinct screamed to run, to leap toward his son and rip the threat from existence. But instinct was not strategy. And this wasn't a boardroom or a courtroom. This was an ambush in a flying prison. He raised both hands slowly, palms out. His face remained neutral, but his eyes burned. "Let the boy go," Jeremiah said, voice low and even. "You don't want this to end the way I'm planning." Rigg's laugh was dry and cracked like glass underfoot. "Planning?" he sneered, pressing the knife closer to Malik's neck. "You still think this is your boardroom, don't you? Still think you're in control?" His grip tightened. Malik winced, sucking in a breath. "I said, nobody moves," Rigg barked, turning toward the cockpit. "Lock the doors. Nobody in, nobody out, or I bleed the boy dry." There was a mechanical click as the cockpit sealed. Jeremiah's heart thudded, but he didn't flinch. Behind his calm, his thoughts raced like a turbine on fire. This wasn't random. This was a setup, timed, rehearsed, and aimed squarely at him. But why? And by who? 2 rows back, a man in a navy windbreaker with a soft jawline and casual posture unbuckled his seatbelt. Dominic Cale, halberd tactical, one of Jeremiah's private marshals riding in disguise. From his position near the emergency exit, another operative keyed into the aircraft's emergency frequency, fingers hidden beneath a fleece blanket. No words were spoken, but signals had been sent. Jeremiah took a step forward. "You're scared," he said gently. Rigg's expression tightened. "You think I'm scared?" "You wouldn't pull a knife on a kid if you weren't," Jeremiah continued. "You're shaking." "I'm shaking," Rigg said mockingly, but his eyes flicked to the blade, then back to Jeremiah. A tiny quiver had betrayed him. "No, I'm settling a score." Jeremiah tilted his head slightly, studying the man. "Then settle it with me." "Leave him." Malik made a small sound, a restrained whimper. He stood still, rigid, but his knees had started to shake. Sweat beaded at his temple. "You think this is about you?" Rigg hissed, spittle catching in the corners of his mouth. "You think you earned everything you've got? Number. You were placed, handpicked, paraded. You're not a man, you're a symbol." He jerked Malik forward an inch. "And I'm here to cut it down." "Malik," Jeremiah called, eyes locked on his son. "You stay with me." "Don't move, no matter what happens." Malik nodded almost imperceptibly. His lower lip trembled, but his eyes never left his father's. And in those eyes, Jeremiah saw something that made his own throat tighten. Trust. Complete, unshaken trust. A soft click echoed. Dominic Cale had positioned himself behind the last row of first class, hands at his sides. Jeremiah caught the movement in the reflection of the oval window, 2 slow taps against the armrest. A signal. Go time soon. Rigg's voice dropped to a whisper now, almost intimate in its threat. "This isn't just for you. It's for everyone who thinks your kind belongs up here." Jeremiah's breath came slow and measured. Every word he said next was weighed like currency. "My son is not a message," he said. "He is not your leverage, your performance, or your revenge. He is a builder of futures, a child, a boy. You're trying to be a headline, Rigg, but I promise you, my plan writes the ending." Rigg's smirk faltered for half a second. His fingers twitched, but then he steadied, and the knife pressed deeper, drawing a thin line of blood across Malik's collarbone. "Then let's end it," he whispered. The boy winced, gasping sharply. Jeremiah's restraint fractured inside him, but his body didn't move yet. He stared at the thin glint of red beginning to bloom on the fabric. Time bent, sound distorted, and even the steady thrum of the engines faded. "One more second," he thought, "and I move." Rigg blinked. Dominic tensed. Malik exhaled. And then, in that moment, the altitude dropped, but the stakes soared. The knife gleamed under the cabin lights pressed against Malik's throat, and every heartbeat seemed to echo through the silence. Jeremiah Quinn froze in place, his eyes locked on his son's, reading both the fear and the fragile thread of trust that bound them. One wrong word, one wrong step, and the world could collapse in an instant. The air was thick with terror, passengers whispering prayers or muffling sobs behind trembling hands. The hum of the engines was steady, but inside the cabin, time itself felt broken. "You're scared, Rigg." "You wouldn't pull that knife if you weren't," Jeremiah said, his voice calm, controlled, deliberate. His hands were open, palms lifted slightly, showing no threat. His tone carried authority, but beneath it ran a current of restrained fury. He took a step forward, slow enough not to startle, but firm enough to claim space. Rigg's laugh was sharp and hollow. His grip on Malik's collar tightened, the blade pressing closer against the boy's skin. "You think this is fear? I've watched people like you rise while real men get pushed down. This isn't fear, it's correction." His voice cracked slightly, betraying the edge of something more fragile, something unstable. Malik whimpered, his chest rising and falling in shallow gasps, his hands frozen at his sides. Yet his eyes never left his father. Jeremiah read the silent plea in them. "Don't let go. Don't let me fall again." That look carried him forward another half step, each movement carefully calculated, his mind rehearsing the angles, the distances, the outcomes. He had negotiated in boardrooms, argued in courtrooms, and faced down rivals, but nothing in his life had ever demanded such precise control. At the back of the cabin, Dominic Cale, the marshal concealed in seat 28C, moved with ghost-like precision. He tapped the armrest twice, the signal they had rehearsed, his knuckles barely audible under the chaos. The second operative near the emergency exit straightened, his hand brushing the seatbelt buckle. The passengers closest to them had no idea, their eyes fixed only on the knife glinting against Malik's skin. Jeremiah caught the reflection in the window, a faint shift, like a shadow moving where no shadow should. His heart surged, but his face betrayed nothing. He had to buy them time. He leaned into the silence, filling it with words. "My son is worth more than whatever message you think this sends. He is a builder of futures. You're trying to be a headline. But I promise you, my plan writes the ending." His voice grew stronger, the cadence of a leader addressing not only Rigg, but everyone watching. For the first time, the knife quivered. Rigg's hand trembled, his knuckles white, his jaw clenched. Sweat beaded at his temple, catching the dim cabin light. He tried to sneer, to hold on to his mask of power, but the cracks showed. "Then let's end it," he whispered, his breath hot against Malik's ear. The blade pressed harder, grazing fabric, close enough for Malik to feel its cold bite. The boy flinched, his teeth digging into his lip, but he didn't cry out. Jeremiah's muscles coiled, his vision narrowing to the space between knife and skin. He had 1 second, maybe 2, before the decision would no longer be his to make. The cabin was silent, every life suspended between air and steel. Jeremiah's chest rose, his breath deep and steady, his gaze unblinking. Around them, the passengers' world collapsed into whispers of dread and the metallic scent of fear. Time bent itself around that knife, that boy, that father, and then, as if the universe itself held its breath, the moment tightened like a drawn bowstring. 1 more second, and a father's restraint would become a storm. The plane jolted, hard. The sudden lurch ripped through the cabin like a violent shiver, throwing cups, magazines, and passengers' bodies against seats and walls. The oxygen masks tumbled down with a metallic rattle, swinging wildly on their cords as startled gasps rose into screams. The air thinned quickly, sharp and biting, forcing every chest to strain for breath. In that chaos, the plan came to life. Dominic Cale, Jeremiah's marshal disguised as a weary traveler, sprang from his seat in 28C with the precision of a soldier who had rehearsed this moment. He launched himself down the aisle, his body low and fast, aiming straight for Rigg Voss. The knife, gleaming under the dim cabin lights, slashed through the air as Dominic collided with him. The blade caught the fabric of Malik's yellow hoodie, tearing a jagged line across the chest. The boy flinched and gasped, instinctively clutching the fabric as though to hold himself together. Jeremiah's reflexes carried him forward before he had time to think. He caught his son as Malik stumbled, pulling him against his chest, wrapping his arms around him like a shield. The boy's breathing was shallow, uneven, but he was alive. Jeremiah's heart hammered. Relief was fleeting. In the aisle, the fight exploded. Rigg's face twisted with fury, veins straining in his neck as he drove his elbow backward into Dominic's jaw. The crack of impact echoed over the frightened whispers of passengers. Dominic staggered but kept his grip, dragging the larger man toward the armrest of a nearby seat. The knife clattered once, slipped, then found its way back into Rigg's fist. Gasps rippled through the cabin as the blade flashed again. Jeremiah's eyes followed every movement, every twitch. He saw Malik trembling, the boy's wide eyes darting between his father and the attacker. He wanted to whisper reassurance, to say, "I've got you." But there was no time. The knife came dangerously close once more, slicing through the air toward Dominic's side. Blood sprayed across the seat cushions as Rigg's elbow connected again, leaving Dominic reeling. It was in that instant Jeremiah made his choice. His mind, sharpened by years of discipline, abandoned restraint. He rose, his body heavy with purpose, and stepped into the fray. One punch. His fist landed against Rigg's jaw with a force that silenced the screams for a heartbeat. The man's head snapped back, blood spattering from his mouth. Another punch. This time, Rigg staggered, his knife arm faltering as his shoulder slammed into the edge of a seat. The blade nicked the upholstery, leaving a dark tear, but missed its mark. Jeremiah advanced, his eyes burning with the weight of every threat, every humiliation, every attempt to break his family. He reached for Rigg, gripping the back of his neck with iron strength. With a roar that reverberated through the cabin, he drove the man's skull into the armrest once. Bone cracked against steel. Passengers screamed, some covering their eyes, others clutching their phones but frozen by the sheer brutality unfolding before them. The masks still dangled, swaying like pendulums above the scene. Again, Jeremiah slammed Rigg's head into the armrest. This time, a tooth flew loose, spinning briefly in the stale air before landing with a faint clink on the aisle floor. Blood painted the gray carpet in harsh, violent strokes. Rigg groaned, weakly clawing at Jeremiah's arms, but the strength in the CEO's body seemed untouchable, fueled not by anger alone but by the primal duty of a father defending his child. For a moment, time slowed. Jeremiah could hear his son's ragged breathing behind him, the faint whimper of Malik calling his name. He could see Dominic, bloodied but alive, propping himself against a seat as he tried to rise. He could feel every eye in the cabin locked on him, some terrified, some silently rooting for him. But Jeremiah no longer cared about their judgment. He tightened his grip and slammed Rigg's head once more, the impact ringing like a gavel declaring judgment in an airborne court. The man's body went slack, blood dripping from his mouth and nose, staining his uniform. Jeremiah straightened, his chest heaving, sweat and blood streaking his once polished suit. His voice, low and guttural, cut through the chaos. "You came for my son," he growled, each word deliberate, each syllable a sentence past. He stared down at the broken figure at his feet, his own reflection caught in the crimson pooling on the floor. His eyes narrowed, his tone ironclad. "But you forgot. Fathers don't beg. They end wars. The knife had cut fabric, but the father tore through flesh and fear." Security agents rushed down the aisle moments later, their boots pounding against the narrow carpet as they swarmed toward the scene. The air still vibrated with the echoes of screams, the metallic tang of blood, and the frantic hiss of oxygen masks swaying above the passengers' heads. Rigg Voss lay sprawled across the seats, his face battered and slick with crimson, one arm twisted unnaturally beneath him. His breaths came in ragged gasps before his consciousness slipped, leaving only the guttural wheeze of a man broken. Two agents dropped to their knees, cuffing his wrists with a mechanical snap, while others hauled his limp body toward the rear of the plane. The cabin buzzed with a dazed silence. No one dared move. Every eye darted between the chaos and the tall figure still standing in the aisle, Jeremiah Quinn, chest heaving, his fists trembling at his sides. Jeremiah did not notice the stares. His world had narrowed to Malik, who clung to him with shuddering breaths. The boy's yellow hoodie was torn across the chest, the fabric sliced by Rigg's blade, darkened now with streaks of blood, not his own, but the spray from the fight. Jeremiah pulled his son close, pressing Malik's head against his shoulder, feeling the boy's trembling ribs beneath his palm. For a moment, father and son stayed frozen together, two hearts trying to beat in rhythm against the aftermath of terror. Jeremiah's mind screamed with the memory of the knife at Malik's throat, the way his son's wide eyes had searched his for rescue. That image carved itself into his bones, deeper than any wound. The aircraft jolted as the wheels slammed against the runway. The cabin tilted, bounced, then steadied. An announcement crackled overhead, something about emergency procedures, paramedics waiting on the ground. But the words melted into noise. Jeremiah's focus locked only on keeping Malik upright, whispering into his son's ear, "You're safe now. I've got you." His voice was low, steady, but beneath the calmness was steel, a promise that no one would ever threaten his boy again. When the plane came to a stop and the doors hissed open, a rush of cold night air swept into the cabin. The sound of shouts and heavy footsteps followed, federal officers storming inside, but unlike the gasps of fear from the passengers, Jeremiah did not flinch. These were his allies, men already briefed by Halberd Tactical, his private security firm. They moved with precision, bypassing him entirely, their eyes locked instead on the unconscious form of Rigg Voss. Within seconds, the disgraced flight attendant was dragged down the aisle, blood trailing faintly on the floor, his body no longer a threat but a reminder of how close the danger had come. Medics rushed forward. One man knelt beside Malik, gently pressing at his side. Ribs bruised. Maybe cracked. No blade wound, the medic reported, his tone brisk but reassuring. Jeremiah loosened his hold only long enough for them to check his son's vitals. Malik winced at the pressure but nodded weakly, squeezing his father's sleeve with a trembling hand. Jeremiah's shirt was stained where the boy's bloodied hoodie had pressed against it. He glanced down, swallowing hard at the sight. That stain was more than injury. It was a mark of betrayal, a line showing just how close he had come to losing everything. Then came the shift, the moment that turned the assault from brutality into revelation. One of the officers, carrying a confiscated phone sealed in a clear evidence pouch, approached Jeremiah's marshal, Dominic Cale. "Found this in his locker." "He didn't send it out yet," the officer said. Dominic took the phone, his brow furrowing as he scrolled through its drafts. A sharp intake of breath escaped him before he handed the device straight to Jeremiah. "You need to see this." Jeremiah's eyes scanned the glowing screen. There, in a half-typed message, sat the words that sent a chill deeper than the knife had cut. Target confirmed. Make him snap. Broadcast the fall. The letters burned, each one a deliberate trap, a blueprint for destruction. Jeremiah's grip tightened on the phone until his knuckles whitened. It hadn't been random. It hadn't been one man's madness. This had been orchestrated, designed to push him past restraint, to capture him breaking in front of the world. Jeremiah's jaw clenched as he replayed the fight in his mind. The knife, the smirk, the deliberate taunts. Every action had been bait, carefully chosen to provoke him into a public explosion. He thought of the passengers with their phones raised, cameras capturing fragments of the chaos. How easily the story could have been twisted. A powerful CEO brutalizing a crew member in rage. But fate had left them one advantage. The footage showed the knife at Malik's throat. It showed Jeremiah not as an aggressor, but as a father shielding his son. Still, the intent behind the scheme gnawed at him. Someone had wanted him to lose everything, his company, his reputation, perhaps even his freedom. Dominic stepped closer, his face shadowed with grim resolve. Whoever wrote that wanted to break you. They failed, but they'll try again. His voice was low, almost swallowed by the noise of paramedics and officers moving around them. Jeremiah nodded slowly, the weight of the phone pressing against his palm like a loaded weapon. He looked down at Malik, who leaned weakly against his side, eyes half closed but still trusting. That trust was everything, and it demanded more than survival. It demanded answers. Jeremiah exhaled, his voice steady but carrying an edge sharp enough to cut steel. He extended the phone to his marshal, meeting his gaze with unshakable clarity. "Find out who wanted this," he ordered. His tone carried no hesitation, no mercy. "Because we're not done." The blood may have dried, but the message was only beginning to stain. He thought humiliating a black CEO's son in public would go unanswered, but justice doesn't stay silent. If you believe every act of cruelty must be answered, hit subscribe. Justice starts here. The moment Jeremiah's fists slammed Rigg Voss into the carpeted floor of Flight 707, the cabin erupted into a flurry of chaos, gasps, and the frenzied blinking of phone cameras. Blood pooled fast beneath Rigg's cheek, spreading in a dark fan against the yellow fabric of the aisle. His body went limp. The knife clattered to the floor and spun once before stopping beneath a seat. Passengers stunned into silence seconds earlier began to whisper, some loudly, others behind trembling hands. No one reached to help Rigg. No one tried to stop Jeremiah. By the time the emergency landing sequence initiated, footage had already begun leaking online. A passenger in row 2D had been live-streaming. His shaky camera caught the violent conclusion but missed the blade held to Malik's neck. The internet didn't care about sequence. It cared about spectacle. Within an hour of landing, clips were spreading like wildfire. One angle showed Jeremiah standing tall over Rigg's broken form, his knuckles bloodied, his breathing heavy but controlled. Another caught Malik, his hoodie torn, buried in his father's arms. And then came the headlines. CEO snaps mid-flight. Child hostage drama ends in blood. Father or fighter? Billionaire pummels flight crew. After standoff, corporate titan brutalizes flight attendant, motivation unknown. In a boardroom on the 47th floor of Zenith Aerospace's headquarters, Jeremiah watched the chaos unfold on a muted screen. Malik lay resting in the adjacent room under medical supervision, flinching in his sleep from aftershocks. Jeremiah's marshal, Dominic Cale, stood at the far end of the room, jaw tense, reviewing footage from the body cam they'd activated during the crisis. "Public's divided," said Marcus Stroud, Jeremiah's longtime strategist and legal advisor. "Half think you're a hero. The rest think you went too far." Jeremiah didn't flinch. He stared at the footage on his tablet, freeze-framed on the exact moment Rigg's blade touched Malik's neck. "I didn't go far enough," he said quietly. "Not if this was orchestrated." Marcus crossed the room, lowering his voice. "We've got offers pouring in. Government people. Quiet deals. No hearings, no press. They'll bury it if you want." "No," Jeremiah replied, voice cold and clear. "We expose it." At that moment, Dominic's tablet buzzed. He checked the alert, tapped once, and a new file opened, extracted from Rigg's confiscated phone. The screen displayed a drafted message, never sent but auto-saved in the Notes app. Target confirmed, make him snap. Broadcast the fall Jeremiah's breath caught. He leaned forward, scanning every word. "This wasn't personal," he muttered. "It was engineered." The room fell silent. Dominic looked up. The message was saved an hour before boarding. Time-stamped. And look at this. Preloaded hashtags, CEO assault, mid-air rage, corporate violence. Marcus swore under his breath. They wanted the world to see you crack. Jeremiah stood slowly, his posture straightening like steel reforged. They thought they were filming a meltdown. But they didn't get one. They got a reckoning. He paced to the window, looking out over the city, the light fading behind high-rise shadows. "Who's behind this?" "We're running traces on the phone's metadata now," Dominic said. "But I did find something else." He pulled up a separate file, a wire transfer from an offshore account. The recipient? Rigg Voss. The sender? A shell corporation linked to Sablecore Systems. Jeremiah turned sharply. "Brent Larrick." Marcus blinked. "Didn't we beat him out for that propulsion contract last year?" "By 2 points, Jeremiah said, "and $2 billion. They all stood in still silence. The sabotage wasn't just about humiliating a man. It was about dismantling his legacy. Jeremiah clenched his fists. He didn't just want to harm me. He wanted to make me the weapon, a man they could point at and say, 'Look, this is who he truly is,'" Marcus whispered. "But the footage?" Jeremiah nodded. "The footage shows the truth." But the headline was written before the plane took off. Just then, another ping echoed in the room. Dominic read aloud, "We've confirmed Rigg was communicating with 2 airport employees flagged in our intel sweep. Both were positioned near the gate. One of them delayed boarding just long enough to isolate you. A setup," Marcus said grimly. "A broadcast," Jeremiah corrected. "They thought they were producing a fall. But I'm the one who'll write the next act." Silence returned, the tension stretching like a taut wire. Then Jeremiah spoke, low but certain. "They tried to make me the weapon," he told his team, "but I'm the architect of their collapse. They didn't just come for the man, they came for the legacy, and that's a war they can't win." The moment the footage from Flight 707 reached the public, Jeremiah Quinn struck back with precision and fury. He refused to let the incident dissolve into rumor or half-truths. Instead, he orchestrated a counterstrike that unfolded like a campaign of war. Every morning began with phone calls to his legal team. Every night ended with strategy meetings inside Zenith Aerospace's glass-walled conference room. The city outside glimmered with indifference, but inside those walls, the air was charged with resolve. Jeremiah's objective had sharpened. This was no longer about defending his son. It was about exposing a system that thought it could bleed families quietly and walk away unchallenged. His first move was public. He authorized the release of unedited passenger footage showing Rigg Voss dragging Malik down the aisle with a knife pressed to his throat. The clip spread like wildfire, played on every network and dissected by every anchor. For days, headlines roared, "Was the CEO a protector or an aggressor?" But when Jeremiah followed it with his own recorded statement, delivered in a calm yet unshakable tone, the narrative shifted. Standing before cameras in a dark suit, he said, "I am a father first." What you saw on that plane was not an executive snapping. It was a father stopping a knife from cutting his child. The words carried weight because they were true, and because his eyes betrayed no hint of regret. Behind the scenes, his marshals were unearthing a darker thread. Bank transfers traced to offshore accounts revealed that Rigg had been funded by Sablecore Systems, a rival defense firm led by Brent Larrick. One marshal, Dominic Cale, slid the evidence across the polished surface of Jeremiah's desk. "They paid him to provoke you," Dominic said, his voice low and steady. Jeremiah scanned the documents, rows of numbers, shell companies, and coded transfers. His jaw tightened. They wanted rage on camera. They wanted me to destroy myself. That revelation fueled the next stage of his campaign. He instructed his lawyers to file lawsuits not only against Rigg, but also against the airport security unit and Sablecore itself. The filings were heavy with evidence, financial trails, whistleblower accounts, and documents showing sleeper agents placed within airport staff. The press devoured every page. Court reporters described the case as the largest sabotage scandal to touch the airline industry in decades. But Jeremiah wasn't satisfied with scandal alone. He wanted reform. When a senator invited him to a closed-door briefing, Jeremiah spoke plainly, his voice echoing across the mahogany-paneled chamber. If security can be bought, then security is broken. If men like Brent Larrick can plant chaos in the veins of our airports, then every passenger is walking into a trap. The senator, a graying figure with sharp eyes, leaned forward and whispered to an aide before replying, "You may have started a fire you can't put out. But maybe that's what we need." Public opinion swayed like a pendulum. Some branded Jeremiah a hero. Others feared his relentless exposure of hidden power structures. News commentators debated whether he was defending democracy or destabilizing it. Through it all, Jeremiah remained unmoved. His focus was clear. He would not let Malik's fall be dismissed as an isolated act of violence. He would not let his enemies frame the narrative. He pushed for full investigations, oversight committees, and a total overhaul of airport security contracting. His resolve spread beyond politics. Fathers across the nation wrote letters and messages, calling him a shield, a symbol, a reminder that no one should be forced to choose silence over protection. At one rally, a man held a sign that read, "He is a father who became a firewall." Jeremiah saw it from the car window, and though he did not smile, a flicker of pride passed through his eyes. Still, the weight of the campaign pressed hard against him. In the solitude of his office, he sometimes wondered if the fight could spiral beyond his control. His enemies were cunning, and they had already proven willing to endanger children for their schemes. Yet every doubt vanished whenever he saw Malik, ribs still tender, sketchpad in hand, drawing designs that looked beyond violence to the future. It reminded Jeremiah why he had to continue, why retreat was impossible. At a late-night meeting with his marshals, Jeremiah stood by the window overlooking the city. The glass reflected his figure back at him, worn but unbroken. "They thought they could use my son to weaken me," he said, voice heavy with conviction. "But if they come for your son on stairs, you burn down every floor they built to get there." The fall wasn't Malik's, it was theirs, and it had just begun. The gavel struck once, sharp and commanding, silencing the restless hum of the packed courtroom. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made every cough, every shuffle of papers, echo louder than it should. Jeremiah Quinn sat in the front row of the plaintiff's side, a quiet pillar of composure in a navy suit, his eyes fixed on the bench ahead. His jaw was set, his expression steady, but beneath the calm exterior lay a storm of resolve. At his side, Malik shifted carefully in his chair, his ribs still tender from the fall at the airport stairs. Yet he stood tall when called forward, the yellow hue of his hoodie visible beneath the formal jacket as though he carried both the scars of a victim and the courage of a witness. On the opposite side, the remnants of a broken conspiracy assembled in visible disarray. Rigg Voss, his once confident posture gone, sat with a stiff neck brace, his face pale under the courtroom lights. Beside him, Brent Larrick dabbed sweat from his brow with a trembling handkerchief, his eyes darting nervously at the cameras that clicked and flashed relentlessly from the press gallery. The attorneys representing the airport security firm whispered furiously among themselves, stacks of papers shifting like barricades meant to shield them from the inevitable collapse of their defense. The prosecution wasted no time. A federal prosecutor stepped forward, his tone steady but weighted with the gravity of what was about to unfold. "This case is not about one man's anger," he began, his voice filling the silent chamber. "This is about a calculated attempt to provoke, manipulate, and endanger. This is about a father forced to protect his child in the face of an orchestrated conspiracy." Jeremiah's hands clenched on the table as the prosecutor paced slowly, laying out the evidence piece by piece. First came the money trails, transfers to offshore accounts tied directly to Rigg Voss, then the encrypted messages, decoded and displayed on large screens for the jury to read. Words of instruction, words of malice, commands to make him snap, to ensure the fall is recorded. Each message landed like a hammer, stripping away the last fragments of doubt. Malik rose when his name was called, his slight frame dwarfed by the weight of the moment. He walked carefully to the witness stand, every step measured, every breath steady. When he faced the jury, his eyes carried both fear and determination. "He didn't just save me," he said softly, his voice carrying through the microphones. "He reminded me that fear doesn't get the final say." A hush swept through the courtroom. Some jurors leaned forward, struck by the sincerity in the boy's tone, by the simple truth that pierced through legal jargon and conspiratorial shadows. Jeremiah watched his son, pride and pain woven together in his chest. The defense tried to counter. One attorney stammered about misunderstandings and stressful circumstances, pointing to Jeremiah's physical response on the plane as excessive. But their words faltered when the prosecution called forward a whistleblower, a former airport employee who revealed how a fake passenger had been deliberately assigned to block security cameras. Another testified about the knife, sanitized and smuggled in before boarding, a tool planted to escalate the confrontation. Piece by piece, the image of coincidence collapsed into a picture of undeniable intent. Then came the moment that shattered what remained of the defense. The prosecutor nodded toward the bailiff, who rolled in a monitor. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, his tone low and deliberate, "what you are about to see was captured by a hidden body cam worn by one of Mr. Quinn's marshals." The screen flickered, grainy at first, then sharpened to reveal the chilling clarity of the scene aboard Flight 707. Gasps rippled faintly as the footage showed Rigg Voss holding Malik in the aisle, knife pressed to the boy's neck. The sound of Malik's muffled cry filled the courtroom, followed by Jeremiah's calm but fierce voice negotiating for his son's life. Every detail was undeniable. The trembling blade, the fear in Malik's eyes, the smirk on Rigg's face as he hissed threats. Jurors looked away, some pressing lips together tightly, others gripping the arms of their chairs. Even the judge leaned forward, his expression grave. The defense attorneys froze, their arguments dissolving before their eyes. Rigg shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his lips pressed thin as though he wanted to speak but knew silence was his only refuge. Brent Larrick's handkerchief fell to the floor, forgotten. Jeremiah sat still, his gaze locked on the screen, reliving the horror yet again. But this time, the fear was not his burden alone. The whole nation, watching through broadcasts and live streams, now carried it with him. For a moment, the courtroom became more than a hall of justice. It was a mirror, reflecting the ugliness of hate and the resilience of love. The prosecutor let the footage run in silence for a few seconds longer before cutting it. No further explanation was needed. The truth had spoken for itself. The silence that followed was unlike anything before. Not the silence of waiting, not the silence of nerves, but the heavy, undeniable silence of truth settling into its rightful place. The courtroom didn't gasp, it went dead silent as truth took its place on the stand. The verdict was swift. The courtroom held its breath as the judge's words echoed through the chamber, heavy with finality. Rigg Voss is hereby sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for attempted murder, conspiracy, and endangering a minor. The gavel struck, a sound sharp enough to pierce the silence that followed. Gasps rippled through the gallery. On the defense bench, Rigg sat slumped in his neck brace, face pale and eyes hollow, as if all the arrogance that once fueled him had been stripped away. His hands trembled slightly, cuffed and bound, while the bailiff moved closer, ready to escort him out. Behind him, Brent Larrick dabbed sweat from his forehead with a crumpled handkerchief. The rival executive's once proud posture crumbling as the charges against him were read. Fraud, bribery, conspiracy. Each word seemed to chip away at his last thread of control. And for Sablecore Systems, the once powerful defense contractor, the hammer came down with equal weight, every government contract revoked, their name tarnished in the eyes of the industry. Across the aisle, Jeremiah Quinn sat perfectly still, his shoulders squared, his expression unreadable. He wore a navy suit that caught the light with quiet authority, but his stillness carried more weight than any display of emotion. Inside, though, his chest surged with a mix of relief and fire. He glanced at his son beside him. Malik, still bearing faint bruises along his ribs but standing tall, met his father's gaze with quiet strength. The boy's presence in that courtroom was no accident. Jeremiah had wanted him there, to see not only the fight, but the victory, to know that their pain had not been ignored. When Malik was unexpectedly called as a character witness earlier that day, the entire room had shifted. He had risen slowly, every step toward the stand echoing with resolve. His yellow tie, chosen to match the hoodie once bloodied and torn, stood as a silent reminder of what he had endured. His voice, though soft, had cut deeper than any attorney's argument. "He didn't just save me," Malik said, his eyes sweeping the courtroom until they settled on his father. "He reminded me that fear doesn't get the final say." The words hung in the air, striking at the very heart of the conspiracy. The jury's faces had softened. The spectators leaned in. Even the judge paused, his pen halting mid-note. For a brief moment, the case was not about contracts or rivalries. It was about a father and his son, and the unshakable bond between them. Jeremiah replayed those words in his mind now as the verdict sealed itself into history. The trial had been brutal, every day filled with questions designed to undermine him, to make him doubt his own choices. But Malik's testimony had turned the tide. It had reminded everyone of the truth behind the noise, a boy nearly lost, a father who refused to break. As reporters outside scrambled to broadcast the sentencing, messages began flooding in. Fathers from across the nation sent letters and emails, some sharing their own stories of standing between danger and their children. Civil rights groups launched a movement called #Flight707Justice, a campaign that quickly gained momentum, using the case as a spotlight on both racial profiling and corporate sabotage. Jeremiah's name was on every headline, yet he refused the endless requests for interviews. He didn't want to be paraded as a spectacle. He didn't want the story to be reduced to a soundbite. There was, however, one exception. The National Fathers in Leadership Conference sent a personal invitation, and Jeremiah accepted. The gathering was held in a grand hall, its walls lined with banners celebrating mentorship and fatherhood. Rows upon rows of men filled the seats, fathers, teachers, mentors, and students, each waiting to hear from the man who had turned a mid-air nightmare into a national reckoning. The stage lights glowed warmly against the polished wood, casting a halo around the podium. Jeremiah stepped up, his figure tall and composed, his footsteps steady despite the weight of countless eyes upon him. He gripped the edges of the podium, pausing to let the silence fill the space. Malik sat in the front row, hands folded, his young face shining with pride. Jeremiah's voice carried through the hall, steady yet layered with emotion. "They tried to paint me as violent," he began, his eyes sweeping the crowd. Murmurs hushed into absolute stillness. He leaned slightly forward, the steel in his voice sharpening. "But the world saw a father stand up." His words resonated like stone against glass, unshakable and clear. He released the podium, his hand lifting slightly as if to invite every man in the room into his truth. "And now, we stand taller, together." The room erupted in applause. Some rose to their feet, others raised their hands high, the sound rolling like thunder. Yet the loudest clap came not from the crowd but from the young man in the front row. Malik rose swiftly, his palms striking together with force, his eyes glistening with tears he refused to hide. His father turned his gaze toward him, and for a moment the noise of the hall faded. All that remained was a father and his son, bound by fire, by survival, and by dignity reclaimed. Justice wasn't loud, it was the quiet weight of dignity restored. Weeks later, reforms swept through the nation's largest airports with a speed and force that left no one in doubt about their origin. The new policies were announced in rapid succession. Every security officer would now wear mandatory body cams, independent third-party watchdogs would oversee passenger treatment, and the newly drafted Passenger Integrity Bill, co-written by Jeremiah Quinn's legal team, was introduced before Congress. The bill itself bore the imprint of Jeremiah's determination, clean language, unflinching accountability, and consequences designed to prevent abuse of power. The nation saw a symbol of resilience in the man who had once been a victim of betrayal in the skies, but Jeremiah himself was already looking elsewhere. To him, policy victories were only one part of the fight. His eyes were fixed on something far more personal. The incident on Flight 707 had scarred Malik both physically and emotionally. Though his ribs were healing, he carried the memory of the blade pressed to his throat with him in silence. Jeremiah noticed it in the way his son hesitated at the sound of intercoms or flinched when uniforms appeared in crowded places. Yet he also saw a new strength, the quiet refusal to be defined by fear. Malik's sketchpad, once filled with spaceships and rockets, now carried bolder strokes, sharper lines, as though each drawing had been reborn out of defiance. Jeremiah understood what this meant. Malik was building futures with his pencil, just as his father was building them with policy. One evening, Jeremiah walked into the study where Malik sat hunched over his sketchpad. The golden light of the setting sun cut across the room, painting half his son's face in warmth while the other half lay in shadow. Malik didn't look up immediately. His hand moved steadily, sketching the outline of a shuttle's wings. Jeremiah watched quietly, noting the determination in each line. When Malik finally set the pencil down, he turned the sketchpad around and held it up. "I want to show you something," Malik said, his voice steady but carrying the faint tremor of pride. His eyes searched his father's face, waiting for a reaction. On the page was the design of a sleek next-generation shuttle. Its contours were sharp yet balanced, a symbol of strength and grace. Beneath the drawing, written in bold letters, was the name, Resilience 707. Jeremiah's throat tightened as he reached out to touch the paper. "Resilience," he repeated softly, the word rolling off his tongue like a promise. He looked at Malik, his expression unreadable for a moment, then softened. "Why that name?" Malik shrugged at first, then leaned forward. "Because that's what we are. They wanted to break us, but we're still here, and I don't want people to only remember what happened on that flight. I want them to see what comes next." The room fell silent for a long moment, filled only by the ticking of a clock and the muted hum of the evening breeze pressing against the windows. Jeremiah felt a surge of emotion, pride, sorrow, determination, all colliding in his chest. He walked over, placed a steady hand on Malik's shoulder, and knelt beside him so their eyes were level. "You're right," Jeremiah said, his voice low but firm. "Pain doesn't define us." What we build from it does. His hand lingered on the edge of the sketchpad before he pulled Malik into a strong embrace. The light outside dimmed as the sun dropped lower, bathing the room in hues of amber and crimson. The moment carried weight, as though the very air understood its significance. For a father who had faced knives, blood, and betrayal, this was the truest victory, to see his son still daring to dream. Jeremiah whispered into Malik's ear, steady and resolute. "We don't just fly, we rise." The pain of that flight would never fully vanish, but what they built from it would outlast every scar. From broken ribs and blood-stained floors, they had drawn blueprints for the future. Jeremiah Quinn's hand tightened instinctively around the steel railing as he placed his foot on the first step. The sun was sinking behind Stonewick Airport, casting long shadows across the tarmac and gilding the staircase in hues of fire and rust. Each step creaked faintly under his polished leather shoes, but it wasn't the sound that made him pause. It was the weight of memory, sharp, clear, and painful. These were the same steps Malik had been kicked from, the same steel frame where his boy's body had tumbled like a discarded coat, bruised and scraped as laughter and indifference echoed in the background. Now those steps were empty. No guards, no shouting, just Jeremiah and his son, walking side by side deliberately as they had every Friday for the past 3 months. Malik, taller now, wore a slate-gray hoodie with the hood down and his curls catching the last rays of sunlight. His ribs had healed, but Jeremiah often wondered about the deeper wounds, what Malik still carried in his silence. The boy's eyes scanned the stair rails, catching flecks of rust near the top. He slowed, but didn't stop. Halfway up, Jeremiah paused. His breath caught, not from exhaustion, but from the sharp sting of déjà vu. "These stairs," he began, his voice low but clear. Malik stopped beside him, nodding slowly. He didn't need to ask what his father meant. His fingers brushed the edge of the railing, where faint scratches still remained from the day he'd tried to stop his fall. "They were supposed to break me," he replied, voice steady, though his gaze lingered downward. Jeremiah looked forward. The terminal's glass doors glinted ahead, catching the fading sunlight like a crown atop their climb. His jaw set firmly. "Instead," he said, his voice deepening with resolve, "they gave us higher ground." They stood there for a moment, unmoving, like statues carved by time and trial. Behind them, travelers rolled luggage across smooth tiles, heads bent toward boarding calls and gate announcements, unaware that they were walking through the very heartbeat of a storm long past. A few employees from Stonewick glanced toward them as they passed, some nodding respectfully, others shifting awkwardly, still remembering the scandal that had rattled the nation. But no one interrupted. No one dared. The weight of what had happened here still hung in the air like mist, invisible but thick with consequence. A gust of wind swept through the stairwell, fluttering a nearby flag as Jeremiah resumed climbing. The higher they rose, the clearer the terminal became. Glass walls, steel beams, and below it all, the cracked concrete where his son's blood had once smeared the floor. Inside the building, a young security guard leaned against the window, watching the two figures ascend. His name was Cole Banning, a rookie on his third week. He had read the case file in training. Memorized it, in fact. Seeing them in person sent a chill down his spine. His supervisor, a hardened man named Grant Helser, stepped beside him. "You ever forget what happened here?" Cole asked, barely above a whisper. Helser shook his head, never taking his eyes off the Quinns. "You don't forget history when it climbs stairs every week to remind you." Back on the final step, Malik reached the landing first. He turned to wait for his father, holding the door open with a quiet smile that said everything. Jeremiah joined him, breathing deep, and for the first time in weeks, let himself exhale without pressure. The summit they reached was not built of contracts or courtroom wins. It was built of something deeper: resilience. Just beyond the terminal, the executive lounge still bore the same logo, the same polished floors. But everything inside had changed. The staff had undergone mandatory reform programs. Surveillance was now independently audited. And in a discreet room to the side, a bronze plaque had been installed, engraved with one sentence chosen by Malik: "Let no one fall here again." As they exited into the quiet corridor, the fluorescent lights hummed gently overhead. But even now, even with the justice served, the cameras watching, and the safety protocols in place, Jeremiah's mind occasionally drifted to the moment when it all could have gone differently. If Malik had landed wrong, if the knife had gone deeper, if help had come too late. But it hadn't. And somewhere, far removed from this light and order, Rigg Voss sat in a narrow cell. The man who once sneered behind a knife now lay on a rusted cot, staring at a ceiling that offered no sky, no power, no voice. He was silent, forgotten, powerless. Because when they tried to break a boy, they awakened a father who built something unshakable. Moments later, the tables turned, the father struck back, and the same stares that caused screams echoed with justice. If you stand for protecting the innocent and demanding accountability, subscribe now. Together, we rise. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It portrays themes of racism, brutality, and the traumatic impact of unchecked authority on families of color. Its purpose is to raise awareness about systemic violence, provoke thought about justice and accountability, and inspire empathy and action against all forms of discrimination.